In this lesson, we're going to cover simulation time tips, things that will save you time in simulation, things that will save you time to know about eQUEST. Let's go ahead and start with the project site utility as we would in a typical file. Here we have the project name and then we have the building type. Note, this is one of the fields that once you set this, you cannot go back and change. We already set some other building parameters. It will not let us change this. So when you set this building type, it's set as soon as you go on to the next item in the navigator. It's set for good. You cannot change this. The next thing to know, and people ask this a lot, is code analysis. Basically, the question is this the lead button? No, this is not the lead button. It was supposed to be, but the consensus of the eQUEST user community that if you're doing a lead model, that you should just leave this set to none and not waste your time. If you're an expert, of course you could try to see exactly what that does, but if you are an expert, it's very likely that you would never need to use this code analysis because there's more exceptions than rules in lead. Next few things to know. For the utility rates, these generally are outdated in eQUEST. A good place to get utility rates, though, is from Energy-Models.com itself. We keep a list that's typically within a few months old of average gas and electric rates for residential and commercial by state. Sorry for the international folks, there's just not enough data that's easy to gather. But instead of using any of the rates built into eQUEST, again, something that is probably a waste of your time. If we start with our building shells, one good thing to know is for daylighting controls. If daylighting is a remote possibility, you should always set this to yes. We may have mentioned that before, it's worth mentioning again because adding daylighting in the detailed mode is extremely difficult, probably near impossible to do on a large scale. The wizard makes it simple as it auto-calculates all of the default parameters that you need to adequately model daylight harvesting. Another thing to do that will save time is to use floor multipliers. This isn't always feasible, but if you can use floor multipliers, it will make the model run faster. A lot of people don't like to do this because then you don't get the pretty picture of your building. However, you can make two models, one for simulation and the other one to get your pretty picture where you leave this button unchecked. For now, we're going to leave this unchecked because we're going to assume that eventually you're not going to be able to use floor multipliers. Now, the same logic goes for shell multipliers if you are using that. Another good tip, sometimes it's good to get rid of the doors. Doors are